One, two, three. Good morning, Tucson, and welcome to hour two of the Creative City Show here on 1030 The Voice. With me, your host, Zach Yentzer. As every day, Monday through Friday, we share the stories and strategies of the people and ideas shaping Tucson's future. And along the way, we envision, we debate, we discuss the issues and themes critical towards getting us to that future. And we are closing out the day, this hour, incredibly strong. In studio today, I have Zyra Livier, who is leading out on the Tucson Families Free and Together initiative, the Sanctuary Cities Movement Initiative here in Tucson. And then when we wrap up, Senator Martha McSally will be on to talk about the water conservation bill that she is co-sponsoring. So let's get into it. I'm excited about it. Zyra, thank you for coming in. I've been reading about you, and it's good to have you in studio.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I like doing radio talk.
Wonderful. Well, you're good at it. Yeah, I can just tell by how you're in the mic and sitting and all that good stuff. If you don't mind, you have a really cool personal story.
Do I?
I think so. Would you mind sharing at least snippets of it? And you've done a lot of work, and you're a fairly younger professional in Tucson, and so I'm just curious how you got your start.
Oh God. I am a migrant. I am from Mexico. I was brought here with my brother by our mother when we were small children. In the early 90s, we were undocumented in the south side of Tucson for quite some time. And I've been in Tucson ever since. I went to the U of A to study neuroscience. I wanted to be a doctor.
I told you that was an interesting bio. I read that and I went, okay, that's a leap, but I get the philosophy part.
And it's, so neuroscience and philosophy of mind, because I've always been a huge philosophy nerd since I think in middle school. And in my last semester at the U of A, I was offered the opportunity to work on the minimum wage campaign of Arizona. So I was the Southern Arizona director for that. And as many of us, quote unquote, take a break, I took a break, and I have not been able to go back ever since. So organizing in the community was never something that I thought of ever doing as a profession. It just kind of happened, and it happened out of need and out of frustration, and here we are. This will be my very first time ever being able to vote in a city election, and oddly enough, I will be able to vote on my own Sanctuary City initiative, so that's quite interesting.
That's an interesting element of this conversation. This has been this topic, Tucson Families Free and Together, the initiative, the drive to get petitions. I mean, this has been in the news consistently since the very first parts of the year. So there's been a lot of content around this. In your words, kind of live here on the air, and we're also on the YouTube live feed. That was more, if you're listening, you want to watch, you can watch. If you're watching, you want to listen, you can listen. In your mind, in the most kind of straightforward way possible, what was the driving force for putting this initiative together and getting it on the ballot? What was that tipping point where it was like, this has got to be done in your mind?
2018, we saw the family separation at the border. And a lot of us not really knowing what to do or how to help. We've continued to see threats against our community. It was so many tipping points. Me personally, I actually lost my brother. My brother was deported during the Obama years, and he wasn't undocumented. He had what you would call quote-unquote papers. And he was murdered. He was executed back in our home state, in our home country, in Querétaro, Mexico. Like so many of the men and women who are deported, the only way to get them back is when they're dead. And that happened to me exactly a year ago. So if you can just imagine, having been organizing around migrants' rights for years, with one of the sole reasons to do so is to get my brother back. And then this happens. It makes you question a lot of things. And for me personally, I saw this effort that was happening in Flagstaff with a family and a group in Flagstaff pushing a bill called Frankie's Bill. Frankie was like my brother, a young man who'd been in the United States almost all of his life, got in trouble, one small little thing, and because of the processes that we have of SB 1070 and the like, he was deported. And Frankie died by suicide not long after he was deported. When people get deported, I don't think people understand what happens to them. They die a social death, is what it is. And to be kept from the ones that you love the most is the worst thing that can happen to you. So for me, seeing this Frankie's Bill being pushed in Flagstaff gave me a lot of hope, because Frankie's family was pushing it as well. And we had the opportunity to then take that bill. The person who wrote it was a former ACLU lawyer who was also a colleague of mine. And we took that bill and we made it into Tucson Families Free and Together. We added a lot more protections to it. We made it very Tucson-centered so that it addressed the issues that we have here. And then we decided to run this thing. It was really about giving ourselves and the community some hope and creating something when so much was being taken from us. And it's been quite a while since I think a lot of us have had that.
Zaira Livier, you are the director of the People's Defense Initiative, and then specific to our conversation today, really one of the leaders, if not the driving force behind the Tucson Families Free and Together initiative, part of the Sanctuary City movement. I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty details with you, and talk about just a lot of the narrative and a lot of the conversation that's been around this, and just while we have you in studio, get your thoughts on this. First of all, just to finish setting it up, and then we'll kind of talk about the different pros and cons that we've heard in the community and that have been well documented. Why? I guess my question is, what parts of SB 1070, because that seems to be a driving force of this, are still of a lot of concern that, in your words, I think you want to push SB 1070 to its limit. What aspects of that need to be pushed?
The aspects that still remain are arguably the worst aspects of SB 1070, which make every law enforcement in the state and every officer a by default immigration agent. So that's what still remains there. They are not just by law, but under threat of lawsuit. They are to inquire about your immigration status if they have any inkling that you might be undocumented, which is what we've known to be the show me your papers law, which is why we always call SB 1070 a racist and xenophobic and repressive law. We understand that someone that's blonde and blue-eyed and is, looks like they are U.S. citizens aren't going to be asked if they were born in this country if, say, they forgot their driver's license at home. But what remains the most about SB 1070 is the message that it sent. When SB 1070 was signed into law, 40% of undocumented people and their family members fled Arizona. They fled. That's almost 1 out of every 2. If you look at the GDP in Arizona and what's happened in certain markets, we have still yet to recover. Tucson has yet to recover. If you go and you speak to local businesses, one of the worst things that ever happened to their business was SB 1070. So basically, it's the narrative that's pushed that remains the most. It's the fear that remains the most. When I was undocumented and I lived in the south side of Tucson, I didn't know what being undocumented meant, but I knew one thing, and that one thing was that you never, ever come into contact with a police officer, no matter what. So you can only imagine what then the message was once SB 1070 was in the books. So we're talking about trying to reverse that, trying to send a different message, making sure that the undocumented community and their family members integrate into our community and take part in social, programs and just the culture of our community.
In 2012, the city of Tucson gave itself a title, and it was more than a title. It wasn't able to be backed up by law per se, but really set the tone of the city of Tucson as an immigrant welcoming city. And many would say that while it's not 100%, there's a lot of don't show, don't tell already going on informally in the city. That a lot of the police force in Tucson is already doing a lot of this, and it's not everyone's story, but it's many people's story that if you're undocumented in Tucson and you get pulled over, in many cases, again, not all, but in many cases, the police aren't asking you for your immigration status. And then on top of that, all but just a couple of even the current the current members of the city council, even candidates, all seem to have concerns about this initiative. What would you say to both kind of Tucson's already doing this, and why isn't this getting support from mayor and council and even candidates?
Tucson, you are absolutely right. Our immigrant-friendly general orders are good. They're just not good enough. They're not good enough anymore. So in 2012, immigrant-friendly was good. Maybe good enough. In 2019, when we have a federal administration and a Department of Justice and the Homeland Security, Border Patrol, and ICE, who are ravaging our communities, who are threatening our communities, and not only that, but trying to expand their reach into the community, into our law enforcement agencies. We have Chief Magnus, who wrote an op-ed in 2017 for the New York Times, who in essence was defending his right to not have to work with the administration and what that rhetoric does. And in that op-ed, the chief of police of Tucson makes all of our arguments for us. So while there is some aspect of don't ask, don't tell, people still do get turned over to Border Patrol and ICE by our police department. Our immigrant-friendly general orders allow things like race proxies to be used in determination of your immigration status, mode of dress, how well you speak English, or if you speak English at all. My favorite, of course, carload, which is how many Mexicans do you have in a truck with you, right? A lot of race proxies that you would actually consider might be unconstitutional. Not only that, our initiative, I say all the time that calling it a sanctuary city initiative sells it short. What this initiative is a really strong enforcement of civil rights for everyone. So we have it in there that if a police officer shows up to investigate a crime that involves something like domestic violence and sexual assault, which, by the way, Chief Magnus also makes an argument for in his op-ed in 2017, that immigration status ought to be off of the table while the crime is being investigated. Another one, U visas. So to encourage undocumented people to collaborate with police and report crimes, there's a U visa certification that when someone who is undocumented is a victim of a crime, reports it and works with police, they are to be given a certificate, and that certificate would then be used to apply for a U visa. This is to encourage women who are abused domestically, sexual assault victims, and the like. we know from talking to the community that those take months, sometimes years, if ever. We have a 90-day expediting process for that. We have an almost ban on being pulled over for something, a pretextual stop like window tinting, which we know then leads to other questioning of the of the person driving. We no longer allow for the questioning of passengers to be questioned on their immigration status. We had a case just like that in December of a high school student that was questioned by TPD and sent to detention center. We have an MOU memorandum that basically says if we are going to be working with ICE and Border Patrol, they have to agree to not pull people over in the city of Tucson for routine traffic offenses.
This is current, or this is what's in the initiative?
This is what's in the initiative. Again, a few months ago, we have a mother off of on mission driving to pick up her child from school. She's going 10 miles under the speed limit. She's pulled over by Border Patrol for a traffic offense, which is a loophole that we have in the state law. That allows them to do this. And she is now fighting her deportation. She spent time in Eloy. So these things happen. Another aspect of our initiative is to start keeping data. Where do we collaborate? How many people do we hand over? We have, Steve Kasachik on record saying 1.5 migrants per month, 20 per year. What's a 0.5 of a migrant? That's my question to Steve Kasachik first off. And 20 people seems like a lot of community members to be handed over to ICE by our police department on a monthly basis. So I push back on all of that. Are they doing better than some? Most definitely. And I'll give Chief Magnus a lot of credit for that. But it is no longer good enough.
So what are, and we've got a good amount of time left to keep getting into things. I'm pushing up on a break, and before I go to that, I want to ask kind of the part B of that is why aren't mayor and council behind this? Why aren't candidates running for office behind this? I think there's two that are supportive of the sanctuary city initiative, but we're not seeing a lot of community support from our politicos. Why is that?
Well, that's a really interesting question and answer, I think. What people often point to the electeds or the candidates that are not supporting this, but the Pima Democratic Party overwhelmingly supports this. They endorsed us. We have labor behind us. PALF is 100% behind us. AFL-CIO, 100% behind us. We have dozens of community members that do support this initiative. So the real question is, why are our electeds and the candidates so out of touch with the community? They are out of touch. And I would claim that this isn't about just sanctuary. This is, of course, people wanting to get elected and not wanting to get behind something that could be seen as controversial, and I understand that. But this is also about power. What we did with this initiative is we're just a group of people in Tucson that said our electeds are not answering the call. We're going to do it ourselves. And just a bunch of us in sneakers and jeans created an almost perfect petition with a 72% validation rate. 96% of our signatures were accepted by the city clerk. The lawyer said in his 30 years, he'd never seen a cleaner petition. And we decided that by our constitutional rights, that when the government fails to provide safety and justice to the community, that it is then our responsibility to do so, and we bypass them. So this is more, in my opinion, about power and about the fact that we didn't ask for permission and that we didn't kiss the ring fingers that needed to be kissed. We're bypassing them, and we're going directly to the core of policy. So I think, I mean, Randy Dorman, I've never seen Randy Dorman in anything immigration related. So do I care that she backs us up? Of course I don't. I understand where Regina and Farley are. I don't agree with them, but I understand. And we're very proud to say that we are a citizen-led, community-led initiative, and we had the conversations about getting endorsements from electeds. We had the conversation of whether we even wanted them. And the answer to that is if they support us, we're very happy. We'll always be there to answer questions. We've reached out to all of them, sat down with almost all of them. But never have we asked any of them to endorse us. And even if they did, it wouldn't be on our website or anywhere there. It's not a focus of ours. It's not anything that makes or breaks us, in our opinion.
So this segues us into, we're going to go to a break, and then when we come back, I want to get into some of the nitty-gritty of some of the concerns that City Attorney Mike Rankin has presented throughout the last half year. The fact that this is an initiative versus something that's led by a city or state level actually plays into this. I don't feel like that gets enough from a technical standpoint. That doesn't get talked about enough. But I also want to talk about some of the concerns on a safety level that other sanctuary cities have faced, and want to talk with you about that. And I think we can go a little bit beyond to cover all of that. Tucson, you're on 1030 The Voice, trusted local news and talk. We're just part one of two through my interview with Zaira Olivier of the Tucson Families Free and Together initiative. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Tucson, welcome back to the program. Part two of my interview with Zaira Olivier, one of the leaders of the Tucson Families Free and Together initiative that will be on the ballot this year, also known as part of the Sanctuary City movement. And I have a few key questions I'm curious to get Zaira's thoughts on, and we'll see if we can get through it all. We've talked about the family aspect of this. One of the things that's been interesting is on the real needs, the real issues that we do need our police and public safety to be involved with. Cities like LA have found themselves in a rock and a hard place where LA police officers cannot arrest undocumented immigrants until there is a crime committed on the street. Has been a con. In other words, we were talking during the break. We're talking about the family side and how we keep families together. But on the side of the criminal activity that is just a part of being a border state. If we're already, I'm going to throw this at you and get your thoughts. If we're already under current TPD leadership, an immigrant welcoming city that isn't 100% doing what you're looking for, but 85-90%, isn't this a challenge to be thought through of how this makes our community unsafe on the other side? What would you say to that?
I would push back on the fact that they're doing close to even 50% of the things that we need them to do. And on the other end of that, it's a very particular proposal. It doesn't shield Tucson Police Department from investigating crime. Also, being undocumented is not a crime. It's a civil infraction. Crossing the border without papers is a crime, the action of it. Being undocumented, if I'm undocumented and I'm just hanging out with you, I'm not breaking any law. So there's no need for Tucson Police Department to arrest people for just being undocumented. But it doesn't prevent them from investigating any crimes at all. What it prevents them from doing is investigating a crime and then before any crime is committed, having to investigate a person's immigration status. So the big misunderstanding here is the fact that when someone is charged with a crime, or domestic violence, or for I don't know, something that's not related to families, drinking and driving or something, right? Drinking and driving, let's put it that way. And they go to the county jail. They're going to be processed. Their status will be checked. ICE detainers will be honored. All of the like will still happen. Our initiative is very peculiar, where it just, because of the nature of citizen city policy is very straightforward in the sense that it puts in protections against racial profiling and against being asked for immigration status under certain circumstances because we had to write this around SB 1070. So I would challenge someone to tell me how stopping police department from racially profiling people, which is what it is, keeps police officers from investigating a crime or solving crimes or stopping crime from happening. Does LA have problems? Of course they do, but they're not related to them being a sanctuary city.
Many would disagree with that.
Their data would be wrong. Of course they would disagree with me. They also, I hear the talking point about San Francisco having a large houseless population, and somehow that's about being a sanctuary city too.
That doesn't connect for me. That one doesn't connect for me.
Right,
but
right,
other things I can see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think the data backs that up. Crime is a problem. Crime is a problem in Tucson. And we're an immigrant-friendly city. And crime was a problem in Tucson before we became an immigrant-friendly city. I haven't seen the changes in data there or if it's helped or not. But there's been study after study after study that I encourage you and anybody else who might make those connections that show that sanctuary cities actually are safer. Crime rates go down, unemployment goes down, poverty goes down. It's an overall lifting of the boat for everyone.
So that's a good segue to another concern that I've heard. I'm just curious to kind of, and these aren't new to you. This is just fleshing out our conversation. So Mike Rankin, the city attorney, talks about how there might be a way that because this conflicts with current state law, that there might be a funding or collaboration issue where we don't get to tap into that in the same way. And that seems to be a concern in a lot of these sanctuary cities is, are we going to lose state and federal funding? Are we going to lose the opportunity? I think in Tucson specifically, I've heard that there's a lot of collaboration at the state and federal level with our drug crime. And we do have an opioid crisis that is tremendous here in Arizona. That's really puts a blockade between some necessary collaboration with state and federal funding and public safety opportunities. Do you believe that relates to this initiative in Tucson?
It's a valid concern because, of course, it's the Trump administration taking funds away from sanctuary cities is something that he's been threatening with for a long time.
It's been ruled unconstitutional.
It has.
Time and again.
Over and over again. He and the DOJ have yet to withhold a penny from any municipality. We're already on his list of being a sanctuary city, so we're pretty safe on these grants from the DOJ, which I believe are about $300,000 that we get per year from this particular grant that we're worried about. But I would just reassure folks to really look into it. It should be of no concern to us. Now, as far as the state, our state's insane, right? So they'll sue us for anything. But you and I were talking about this earlier. They can't just take away funding. They can't just take it away. On the collaboration part, I will say this. We have one particular proposal in our policy that says that federal agencies have to agree to not do routine traffic stops like we were discussing earlier. A routine traffic stop, which isn't what ICE and Border Patrol normally do anyway. They do it sometimes. It's a normal agreement. Memorandums of understanding happen all the time when there's a collaboration between agencies. In these task forces and whatnot that you were just discussing, we have memorandums of understanding. Chief Magnus, again, in that 2017 op-ed, wrote about this in particular. He said that whether a city is designated sanctuary or not, all of the other operations continue. Operations for against drug trafficking, operations against human trafficking, and those high-level type crimes where we have all of that collaboration happen still happen. Our initiative doesn't touch any of that collaboration. Again, it's about protections, civil rights protections for our community when they come into contact with police. It doesn't hinder them from taking part in the many task forces that we have where we do collaborate with police. And by the way, we also take Stone Garden money in the city. So there's plenty of collaboration between our agencies happening at this moment. And I think you wanted to then talk about the state funding later. Sorry, I jumped the gun on that one.
That's okay. Let's see if we can. We've got about 4 minutes, and I have one more question for you. This is happening too fast, going by too fast. I think we have a caller question for you. We have Jeff online too. I think we're just going to be able to get to Jeff as well. But Jeff, you have a question for Zaira Olivier, leader of the Sanctuary City movement.
Yes, my question is going to be, since there's presumed to be about 12 million illegal aliens in the United States, and that's a very extremely conservative number by many estimates. What would be your plan then for, do you want to extradite any of those people or deport, if we'll use the word deport? Should any of them be deported? If not, should they all be then given some sort of blanket amnesty, ollie in free? What's your plan to not offend anybody in this process? Thank you.
Jeff, thank you for your call, and I don't think we're going to be able to get to any more calls. Unfortunately, we're wrapping up. Thank you for calling in. Please leave your question if you called in and we're on our lines. Leave your question with Bob, and I can get you an answer in a different way. Zaira, how would you respond to Jeff?
Sir, I'm just a Tucson person. I'm not sure I can have a plan for the 12 million undocumented people in the country. But if I did dream of having a plan, it would be a blanket amnesty for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We can probably leave it right there, just because it would take probably 10 minutes to get into that, and we should have a second interview. I think that would be good before the November election. One quick thing, and this is just a journalistic thing because I think it's an important distinction. We've talked about some pros and cons, as many as we could get to, but many sanctuary cities, as I understand, are either city or state-led. For example, California is a sanctuary state in support of 20 sanctuary cities. I think it's important to note that this is a voter-led initiative, not a city-led one, and to you that's an important distinction.
Yes, it's huge. We're the first community in the country, in the history of this country, to do so, to the community, to bring this up, bring this to the voters, and organize ourselves around sanctuary city policies. And I think that just goes to the history that we have here in Tucson, the welcoming, the love that we've always had, and the resistance that we've always had against all of these anti-immigrant and xenophobic and racist laws that we've seen passed in Arizona. So I think we're all very, very proud of that. And we should all be very, very proud of that, even if we don't support this, because this is about people exercising their right to direct democracy.
The thing that I wanted to pull out of that real quick is that in your mind, I think I've read that Mike Rankin's concern, the city attorney, is there is a state law that says if a city or a local jurisdiction is in apparent disobedience of a state law, that there are opportunities to cut funding to that local jurisdiction. Is it true that because this is a voter initiative, you feel like that's a loophole that you have on that, or?
Yes, and actually in his memo, there's a small footnote where he exactly marks that. He says that the SB 1487, which is the bill, is completely silent on citizen initiatives. And it's a very important point, and I'm so glad you bring it up because no one ever talks about this. Citizen initiatives in the state are completely protected by the Constitution, which even the state legislature cannot touch. So SB 1070 relates to laws that are passed by the city government, and this is not being passed by the city government. This is a citizen-led initiative.
Okay. Zara Olivier, thank you for your time. That took us right to the absolute hard stop that we had. Thank you for coming in and spending 40 minutes with us and for talking with us about Tucson Families Free and Together. And we'll set up another interview where we can keep talking about some of the details as we get closer to November. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Tucson, that takes us to our break. When we return, Arizona Senator Martha McSally will call in to share with us the water infrastructure bill that she has co-sponsored out of the state of Arizona. Water is a sleeper issue in Tucson. We're going to touch on it when we come back from the break. You're on 1030 The Voice, trusted local news and talk. Tucson, welcome back to the program, The Creative City Show, with me, your host, Zach Yentzer, on 1030 The Voice, as we share the stories and strategies of the people and ideas shaping Tucson's future and debate, discuss, and talk about those issues critical towards our best possible future. And there's perhaps no more important future forward-looking topic than our water supply, especially in the Southwest. And in late June, U.S. Senator Martha McSally and Senator Kirsten Sinema introduced legislation to improve water supply infrastructure. And on the line through the rest of the hour, we have Arizona Senator Martha McSally to talk about this bill with us. Senator, thank you for calling in. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Zach. It's good to be back on again.
Yes. Well, the last time we did kind of a lightning round, rapid fire. I think we fit 5 questions into 10 minutes, which is impressive as far as I think everybody's concerned. But this time I wanted to really do a bit of a deep dive with you on the Water Supply Infrastructure Rehabilitation and Utilization Act. Water is such a sleeper issue here in even the Tucson conversation at this very moment. Some are talking about it, but it's so important. And it's kind of on the knife's edge, so thank you for working on it.
Oh, absolutely, Zach, and thanks for bringing it to your listeners' attention, because water is our future for sure in the desert in Arizona, and a lot of our infrastructure, and our bill addresses it. It's really old. You know, some are coming up on 100 years old that are major infrastructure elements of our water security. And so our bill, if you want me to get into it, I'd love to.
Please do.
In layman's terms here. So let me just explain what we're trying to do here in one element of it. And I found this out when I visited Yuma in my 15-county tour that I took when I first got appointed to the Senate in my first 90 days. And I met with a lot of the leaders in Yuma. One of them we actually had testify today, Wade Noble. He's really an amazing, knowledgeable leader on water issues and agricultural issues. And he brought to my attention that we have this Imperial Dam. And Imperial Dam actually provides water to a significant number of people and farms in California and in Arizona. And the bottom line is it's Bureau of Reclamation, so the federal government owned, but it's basically operated by the water districts. And for regular operations and maintenance, they pass the fees on to the water users. So that's you and me. I mean, we don't get our water from the Imperial Dam, but those who do, the fees get, any sort of operations and maintenance get passed on in your water bill, right? We all get a water bill every month. You wonder what all those fees are for. So when they're trying to fix something or they've got to upgrade something, it's getting passed on in your water bill. Because the way some of these regulations have been designed, they're unable to invest and get access to capital for major improvements that need to happen at dams like Imperial. Their only option is to basically pass it on to the user and pay it off in 1 year in most of these districts. And that's just not realistic, because that means water bills would just absolutely spike and go through the roof. So we're trying to provide a better option for these water districts as our infrastructure is aging to get access to capital that they can then basically be loaned, and then they can pay it back over a longer period of time with interest, and allow that to be an investment in, the infrastructure that isn't having to be draconian increases in prices within a year. So that's a major provision that's in our bill that's really going to make a difference for water users in the Southwest.
No, that's huge, and thank you. I mean, I've looked into this and even done a bit of a segment on the show before, but that layman's terms was helpful
Yeah,
because that's not
sure.
necessarily what I got before. So that's great. And then also
Yeah.
existing surface storage facilities will also will also be a part of this legislation. So it's both repairing and rebuilding aging facilities, and then making
Yeah.
sure that more can be stored better. Is that the case?
Yep, that's exactly it. So there's a couple other provisions in our bill. Again, one of them is related to safety of dams. So that's just, again, additional safety issues and modifications of dam structural integrity. And then the last one just provides a little bit more flexibility to flood control requirements. And this is just something that, in Arizona, as you can imagine, in the dry, hot months, we have a lot more water evaporation and water use. And then when we have more rains in the monsoons, things will increase in places like where the Roosevelt Dam is. And so these sort of like one-size-fits-all requirements about how they need to manage that water doesn't take into account the flexibility. We could actually save more water over time if they're given a little bit more flexibility on how they manage it.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are kind of the three provisions in this bill. We also had another bill we talked about today, which is about future water infrastructure, and we worked that. Senator Sinema and I worked that together with Corey Gardner from Colorado and some others. So our bill, the first bill I just talked about, is about existing infrastructure. The other bill we talked about today is about new water infrastructure, for new storage capabilities and canals and other things in order to accommodate the growth that's happening in the West.
Absolutely, and I couldn't have asked for a better segue. Arizona Senator Martha McSally. I was just going to ask you, by 2055, I think Phoenix is going to double, Tucson's going to grow by about 50%. I mean, already in the state today, we are seeing it be a state of newcomers. I mean, so many people
Yep.
are coming to Arizona. What does the future of our water supply look like? How do we innovate that to make sure we have enough as we grow? Because it seems like we're going to continue growing, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a real blessing that we have more and more people who love Arizona and come to Arizona for a variety of different reasons. Many like me served in the military here and fell in love with the place. A lot of people never want to see another winter as long as they live, and so decide to settle here. We've got a strong economy, so we're attracting businesses who come from non-business friendly states to us. And so it's a good problem to have for sure, but we are the desert and we need to make sure we're good stewards and we have, good planning to provide for the water future for all that development. And that includes agricultural and other sort of commercial and housing developments. And so it's a combination of things. Again, water is a very complex issue, but we do have the Colorado, river water, which we very much rely upon, and the drought contingency plan that I led through the Senate and got signed into law is going to help manage our water future there. We also have water that's surface water, and we have, aquifer groundwater. And so, each little area is different, and making sure that we are being good stewards of the water, that we're using innovation in order to recharge and recycle the water where it's appropriate, or even just investing as it might become more lucrative over time, desalinization. It's a combination of all of those things that we need to do, because every community gets the water from a different source, and it's all different areas. We've got to make sure that we've got innovation going on in order to protect the water that we have and make sure that we can sustain the growth.
I know you have to run in a second, Senator, but are you encouraged by the innovation you are seeing around effluent and recycled water specifically? That feels like that's where the most innovation can happen.
Oh, absolutely. There is. I know it sounds like kind of a yucky topic to people, right? That there has actually been some innovation there where they're able to recycle that water and have it be used for other purposes. So there has been tremendous innovation there, and I think only more is going to be happening in that area to make sure that we're not just wasting that water, that we're squeezing as much efficiency and using it for appropriate purposes, cleaning it up and getting it back into the the water system is we've had some really great breakthroughs there.
That's wonderful. I think we have 1 or 2 minutes left with you, Senator. Could you just recap real quick the activity in April, the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan Authorization Act? What are the real brief nuts and bolts on that? Can you recap?
Sure. This is so important because our water in Arizona is very much reliant on the Colorado River. There's 7 states and Mexico, I think about 40 million people relying on this water. But we have had drought, and draconian measures were going to happen that were really going to hurt Arizona if the states didn't come together and provide some agreements on how to better manage that. But it literally took an act of Congress after Arizona worked really hard within the state. The leadership of Governor Ducey and all the stakeholders came together. But we had to pass it into law in order to codify it and execute it. So in a day where people are really discouraged about nothing's happening in Washington and the partisanship that's going on, I led the legislation in the Senate. Raul Grijalva led the legislation in the House. We had all Democrats and Republicans from all 7 states supporting this bill. And after we introduced it, 6 days later, we got it passed out of the House and the Senate and sent to the president's desk to sign into law. So this is a great example of partnerships for something that's really important to solve a problem and get it done. And I'm really proud to have led the effort in the Senate.
And on that note, am I reading correctly that this legislation that you just introduced the end of June, it has a national impact, right? I mean, it was sponsored by you and Senator Sinema here in Arizona, but it has national impact, correct?
Oh, absolutely. So again, it came from the meeting that I had in Yuma when I first was appointed to the Senate, but it has national implications for other water infrastructure projects. We asked the question today in the hearing about how this will impact other communities around the country, but especially around the West, and it's going to have a positive impact so that communities can invest in their aging water infrastructure and they don't pass the fees on to the users in just 1 year. They can spread it over time and pay back in interest. This is really common sense, but we've got to get legislation passed in order to allow that to happen, and it's going to help a lot of communities.
Well, thank you for your work on that, Senator Martha McSally from the state of Arizona. And thank you for your time calling in to update us on a couple key pieces of water legislation regionally and nationally.
All right. Thanks, Zach. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thank you, Senator. And that was my conversation with the Arizona Senator Martha McSally, talking about 2 critical pieces of water legislation and planning. And, like I said, we did a rapid fire 5 questions in 10 minutes interview the first time that we had Senator Martha McSally on our show. And I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a sleeper issue. So many things in the news that we could have talked about for sure that are getting a lot of airtime. I want to talk about water today with the Senator, and that is inspired by you, the listeners. In fact, it's been you that have really turned my eyes towards doing more deep dives and focuses on our water issues in southern Arizona. So thank you for that. And you can always listen back to that full interview with the Senator or anything you missed here on today's program by going to kvoi.com/podcasts or going to iTunes or Google Play Music. You can listen back to all 2 hours of today's show, and it was full. It was iconic. We started off with R&B and blues icon George Howard here in the studio, and we're thankful for his time. Well, don't go away. Our live and local talk continues with the Bill Buckmaster Show. Tucson mayoral hopeful Regina Romero will be in for the first half of the show, and then in the second half of the show, 12:30 on, Arizona Superintendent of Public Instruction Kathy Hoffman will call in as well. Another good Bill Buckmaster show. Tomorrow, finish off strong with us. We have Arizona Corporation Commissioner Leah Marquez Peterson in the studio to talk with us about the latest happenings in Ajo and her efforts here as a representative from Southern Arizona on the Corporation Commission. We'll catch up with her tomorrow in the 10 o'clock hour, so stay tuned for that. Tucson, it has been a pleasure, as it always is. Thanks for your calls. Thanks for your listening. This has been the Creative City Show with me, your host, Zach Yentzer, on 1030 The Voice. Trusted local news and talk. We'll see you tomorrow.